let's see. Here's your.
Oh, thank you.
There's. I'll give you. I've got some stuff for you.
All right, thank you.
Better get my glasses. I'm getting hot. You've added a little bit more grace since I saw you last.
Yeah.
Stressful job.
Keeps coming. The gray.
Sure, we'll say that. We'll say
But you look younger in total.
All right, Doc. Thanks again. Great
Yeah.
to see you. Appreciate your time. You're the first person I thought of when I saw this.
It really good.
It came out and it made it sound as if, boy, this is the nail in the coffin for any kind of doubters. What's your take on?
Yeah, it's definitely not the nail in the coffin, Bert. This is kind of a rehash of some of the same stuff that's been coming out of Danish studies and studiers for quite a while. In fact, there's a lot of problems with the study. The first one goes back to the point of who funded it, who's participating in it, and as a former medical editor of a medical journal, I can tell you that when I analyze these papers, I always go to what's the funding source and who's involved in it. Those disclosures are right in the document. Well, you have to click on a link to see those disclosures, but those disclosures indicate a pattern of conflicts of interest. Several of the editors themselves are invested heavily in pharmaceutical, Pfizer, Eli Lilly. I mean, a medical journal should not have their editors heavily invested in pharmaceutical, the same interests that they're publishing, research data on. This study itself was published by, or was funded by Novo Nordisk, a pharmaceutical entity in the Netherlands, and they are heavily involved and interested in the production of vaccines. So you have an industry-funded medical study, but it's a research study that we also have to look at the methodology that was used. This is a retrospective case control cohort study. It's a big number of children, and they're using first of all, they never looked at a medical chart. It says it right on the first page. Limitation: no individual medical charts were reviewed. This is epidemiology being used to do medical research. It's prone to a whole bunch of opportunities for bias. The first opportunity for bias in a study of this nature is in selecting the cases. They're looking at a database that is a registry of the children in Denmark. That study is, or that data is very limited. It's a very, it doesn't have all of the medical chart information. It doesn't have, what other comorbid conditions do they have, etc. It's very prone to the investigator selecting information out of that cohort study that on a very biased basis. The first evidence that there's bias in this study is that the reported incidence of autism in the population was about half what it is in the Danish population. That's kind of a smoking gun that the investigators, when they were selecting the cases and they were selecting the case controls, they somehow didn't get a representative population of the Danish population. And it's kind of complex. The overall issue I think that we have with a lot of these medical research publications is that it's very complex. The science is messy. The statistical analysis is difficult for a layperson and even the media, even somebody as smart as you, Bert, being able to understand, the complexities are involved here. But there's so many opportunities for bias. The senior editors of the British Medical Journal and Lancet have both said about 85% of the medical research is fraudulent.
Was there anything in the study that you felt was groundbreaking or new, or tried to examine the issue from a different perspective?
No. In fact, it's a rehash of something they did in 2002. The same group, Havid, the lead author in this publication, was also involved in another publication that was the lead author was Madsen in 2002, using the same kind of Danish registry cohort analysis that tried to say that the MMR vaccine was not associated with autism. Then they also did a similar study, the same group, trying to say that thimerosal was not a problem, which even here in the United States we said, well, it's enough of a problem that we want to remove it from the vaccines. It's still not removed from all the vaccines. It's still in the multi-dose vials, and specifically the flu shot. So a lot of kids are still getting thimerosal in the United States today. So they were wrong in their analysis then, at least as we saw it here in the United States, in the removal of thimerosal. But more importantly, that same group included Dr. Paul Thorson. He is a FBI most wanted criminal that was participating in a lot of these studies. In fact, I think it was 21 of 24 studies that the CDC was using to say that vaccines were not associated with autism. He was a co-author in, and Paul Thorson was found guilty of fraudulently defrauding the CDC of over $1 million that he was paid in grant money to conduct scientific research on vaccines, and he misappropriated those funds. Apparently, the money was used, but the research wasn't really conducted. Those grants are pretty tight, right? You're given a bunch of money based on the cost of producing research. If he's misappropriating those funds, he's not doing the research. So the basis for a lot of the vaccine research in the United States today is based on the research that was done by an FBI most wanted criminal. And I have a problem with that. Havid was one of the co-authors and one of the cohorts of this Paul Thorson, and the same group is doing the same thing again.
If you were to be in charge of the study, what would it look like? What elements should it have in order to definitively answer the question?
Great question, and it's an easy answer. It's a it's a prospective, randomized, double-blind, placebo-controlled trial that looks and placebo-controlled, real placebos. That's not what's being done in the vaccination. I'll come back to that. But it is gold standard medical science. It's vaccinated versus unvaccinated children. And we have plenty of that, of those population groups here in the United States to do the study, and we've never done it. In vaccines, we do not do what is required of every pharmaceutical drug put on the market in the United States today. We don't conduct that gold standard science in vaccines. We have given vaccines a special class, a special pass that we should never have done.
That's interesting. So, and is it because the idea of giving a kid a placebo vaccine could be considered endangering them? I mean, you know what I mean, in the larger picture of thing, if you were to give it.
That's kind of the premise that is used to say it wouldn't be ethical to do those kind of studies, and yet we do them. What they do instead, Bert, is even so more. It's so egregious. So what we use as a placebo in vaccine studies is another vaccine, or what Merck did in the Gardasil trials is they used an activated placebo. They used a control group that got an activated placebo that contained everything that's in the Gardasil vaccine except the antigen, except the HP, the human papillomavirus antigen. Got the same amount of aluminum that is in the Gardasil. It's a great way to conduct a fraudulent pseudoscientific study where you want to mask the adverse events that occur in the control group and the test group. So the test group being the Gardasil, the control group being the activated placebo group. In that study, the same number of young, healthy women and a few young men died or had serious adverse events, and it made it look like, and Merck could say in the preclinical trials, they could say, see, there was no difference between these two groups. So Gardasil was no worse than placebo. And that was a travesty of science, Bert. It was, and it's done all the time. We're not doing saline, true placebo-controlled studies. So we don't really know whether these vaccines are safe and effective. And I'm telling you, I know that seems almost heretical coming from a medical doctor, but man, I've been studying this for 15 years, and I'm telling you that we're not doing gold standard science in vaccines today.
So are there any studies out there right now, to your knowledge, that are being done that will help answer some of these questions?
No. I'm not aware of any. So many of the studies, they have this free pass to do this. They don't have to do any vaccinated versus unvaccinated studies, Bert. We've been the industry, medical doctors, Physicians for Informed Consent, a national organization of physicians that are very concerned about this issue, are screaming for this study. For the NIH, the CDC, for somebody to do a true gold standard scientific analysis that looks at the health outcomes in a vaccinated versus unvaccinated population. Until we have that study, we're not doing real science in vaccines. We don't know whether we're protecting our children or we're causing them harm. In the United States, we've reached a rate where it's 1 in 36 children have autism. Interestingly, in this study out of the Denmark, they had 1 in 100. What's interesting so they have 1 in 100 children, and that's what this recent study found in Denmark that have autism. We should be asking, why do they have, why are we 2.7 times worse in our autism rate than they are in Denmark? Well, one of the answers is they do a fraction of the number of vaccines that we do in the United States. American children are the most vaccinated population of children in the United States. And still, of all the vaccines that we give children, you know how many studies that we've done to ask the question, are these vaccines safe? How many vaccines have we tested for safety?
Let me get to...
Well, the answer is one. It was an MMR vaccine. We haven't tested polio, DTaP, Hep B. We haven't tested those for true safety.
And just to get to the baseline issue here, again, in your medical opinion, should parents be concerned that vaccines could in fact cause autism?
Yes, they should be. Absolutely. I mean, and we won't know definitively, and that's my concern, is we won't know definitively until we do the scientific testing that is the gold standard in medicine, in science, in pharmaceutical drugs of all kinds. We're not doing that in vaccines. Until we do, we simply don't know. But we have increasing evidence that aluminum adjuvants translocate to the brain, increase inflammation in the brain, and cause brain swelling that can cause damage. We think that we have significant evidence that brain swelling in certain subgroups of children can be significantly more damaging and perhaps permanent. And we're not doing we're not doing anything to screen for those risk factors and eliminate those, or to test those before we start administering vaccines, where we might be giving a child at 6 months 7 to 9 vaccines, or at 12 months 11 to 13 vaccines simultaneously. You know how many studies that we've done to test whether multiple vaccines administered at one time are safe? 0.
I often wonder, from your perspective, what does it feel like to be a doctor?
Yeah.
Preaching what you're preaching in a culture where you're made to look like the outlier.
Yeah, it's lonely.
That's what I'm saying.
It's scary. It's lonely, and it's it's. I wish this hadn't, I wish I didn't know. But, you know, I started seeing the evidence of this 15 years ago as I was reviewing research for publication, and I, you know, and I approved 2 research studies that showed an association of the MMR vaccine with retinal hemorrhages in the back of the eye. You know, inflammation. The premise of those 2 research studies, one from Italy and one from the West Coast, was that the MMR, there was an association with retinal hemorrhages in the back of young infants that was associated with the administration of the MMR vaccine. And I recommended both of those publications to be published into the journal. And what I was told is, we can't publish those, Jim. And I was like, why can't we publish? This is really interesting stuff. It goes in the face of what we teach in ophthalmology and medicine. And the reason was because Merck was a major funder and contributor, donor to the university for which I was working at the time.
So it seems like you guys are on a perpetual treadmill.
Yeah, I mean, I'm as a physician that took an oath to do no harm, and as a, you know, former member of the United States military that took an oath to serve and protect, you know, from enemies both foreign and domestic. When I see the pseudoscience, the corporate purchase of medical research that's being published, you know, 85 out of 100 articles being, you know, blatantly, overtly fraudulent, I see this kind of conflict of interest that is poured into a weak research methodology. You can't do vaccine safety research with epidemiology where you never look at a medical chart. You can't do that from a database registry. There's so many inherent biases in that process, and yet this publication comes out the day before they're doing congressional hearings in Washington, D.C. You think that's coincidence? I just don't. I see that we have the most powerful entity in the history of the world, the pharmaceutical industry, that is powerfully involved in making sure that their, you know, $40 billion industry that for which they are not liable, they have product liability immunity granted to them by the United States Congress starting in 1986. And since 1986, we've had this proliferation of that. You know, there's almost 5 times more vaccines being administered to children today than there was in the 1960s, 1970s, and we have a dramatic increase in autism. Everybody wants to pretend that it's something else. We don't know what it is, but it's something else, and yet so much of the data points directly to the problem that we have with vaccines. And so I stopped being complacent and silent in the face of something that I see as a scientist as a real travesty in how we're conducting medical research in this country. It concerns me. I have no dog in this fight. I don't make money in any aspect of this. I'm not financially bought. I have no conflicts of interest. I'm simply a husband, a father, a doctor that says we should demand better. And we are being misled. We're being misled by weak studies that the media is parading all over. It's all over social media that this is the nail in the coffin. This is not the nail in the coffin. This is weak pseudoscience that's funded by industry, that's being exaggerated to no end. And it's got to stop. We should demand better science from our institutions. You know, we should demand better science from our doctors. We should demand informed consent be given every time a parent is considering a vaccination for their child. And we should be honest about the fact that we have not truly studied these vaccines. It breaks me to think that medicine has come to this point that we are so co-opted by such a powerful industry. And Bert, your industry has been co-opted by pharma. It's just it's harming too many people, and that's why I do what I do. And I spend every day worried about when they're going to try to take my license away, when they're going to, do what, when they're going to Wakefield me or something like that. And that's why there's so many physicians that think just like I do, that are silent. They're sitting on the sidelines because they don't want to step into this arena because it is dangerous. We put our careers, our families, our income on the line, and I don't want to do it. But man, I can't see this happening. I got beautiful grandkids, and it goes beyond just the fact that our children might be harmed by a vaccine. It's the fact that we believe the flu things like the flu shot are beneficial. The evidence now is that these vaccines actually increase the likelihood that a child that's been recently vaccinated is 3 times more likely to be hospitalized if they get a serious infection. That we're almost 7 times more likely to transmit those viral particles with every breath, with every sneeze, with every cough, if you get a strain of the flu virus after that is different than the one that the vaccine imparted in you with the vaccination, the flu vaccine. So if you get a flu vaccine that completely misses the circulating pathogens, and you get one of those pathogens that, the hundreds that are out there that weren't covered by the 4 that are in the vaccine, you're almost 700% more likely to transmit that infection to somebody else. We're creating infection in the community. And there's the studies and the science to support that are out there, but they never get the coverage. The independent research is almost never covered, and then this crap gets covered. This is the same old news from the same old group, bought and working for industry with a big financial bias, lots of conflicts of interest, and we think that that's relevant science. I'm telling you, it's not.
Thanks, Doc.
You good?
Yeah.
I was gonna fix that wire.
No, yeah, we're good. Thank you. Just take it off. It's always a pleasure. Really is. Appreciate you.
You bet.
Just try to slide it out.
Oh, you bet.
Yeah, thank you. Just stay there real quick. Let me get some cover.
Yeah.
This is one of the key studies from a leading aluminum researcher in the UK, Christopher Axley, and he's shown that aluminum that we inject, basically aluminum replaced thimerosal. It's an adjuvant that is designed to stimulate the immune system, and we're injecting as much as 4 milligrams or 4,500 micrograms of aluminum, and what happens is it gets picked up by macrophages and translocated to the brain. Then it gets deposited throughout the brain. And in children that died with autism, the brain biopsies, the study and analysis of the amount of aluminum that was in their brains is astronomical. It's off the charts. And this is the smoking gun that demonstrates, what we're doing wrong. And it's not getting enough coverage, Bert.
Aluminum content of brain tissue in autism is consistently high.
That's the real news story.
Yeah.
But
it's
nobody
one
will
of the
break
many.
it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it really is a big part of this news story is, well, why is Denmark's autism rate so much lower, than in the United States? Why are we
1 in 100?
Yeah, it's 1 in 100. So in 2002, when they did their initial analysis of this research, it was 1 in 1,000. In the last, and they've added several vaccines since then. Their vaccine schedule is significantly different than ours. Here's what the Danish vaccine schedule looks like. Someplace in here. Yeah. So there's the Danish vaccine schedule. Here's the U.S. schedule. when there's a regression analysis that's been done that looks at the number of vaccines and the rate of autism and in the population of the various countries that have different vaccine schedules, and it tracks directly to the amount of vaccines being given. So the United States has the worst rate of autism and ASD, autism spectrum disorder, and of all of the developed countries. In fact, there are several third world countries that have better rates than us. We also have the highest infant mortality, and it correlates directly to the amount of vaccines that are being given. Many countries don't even use the MMR. Japan, they broke the measles, mumps, and rubella vaccines into separate vaccines, and I think we should at least do the same here in the United States.
So is the theory that the aluminum, I mean, just some brains are more, if the aluminum thing is what's causing it, that some brains are more sensitive to that, or?
No, it looks, we're all sensitive to it. All of our brains are sensitive to it. Some people's, so the subsets of children that seem to be more susceptible to aluminum are ones that have mitochondrial disorders. So the Hannah Poling case was the vaccine court system rule that autism caused by vaccines. This child had a mitochondrial disorder. The fact of the matter is that the incidence of mitochondrial disorder in children is very high, as high as 40. Some studies have shown it as high as 50%. So at least 25% in every study. So it's far more children than what we realize. Children that have a mitochondrial disorder. Another one seems to be the MTHFR gene mutation that makes them less capable of dealing with toxins. So they can't remove toxins from their body as well because they have this gene mutation that codes for an enzyme that's very important in the creation of glutathione. And so they have these subsets of children are just less capable of dealing with toxins of any kind. Aluminum is a well-known neurotoxin. The idea has been we're trying to put as little of that adjuvant in children's bodies, just a small enough dose that it won't cause harm. It will stimulate the immune system. But what we've subsequently found is that it's the smaller doses that escape our body's ability to kind of wall it off and prevent it from being picked up by macrophages. So the dose doesn't always make the poison. And with aluminum, it seems that the lower doses, they escape our body's it's small enough, they fly underneath, the aluminum flies underneath the radar, doesn't get walled off in a granuloma at the injection site. And the smaller doses are more capable of being picked up by the macrophages, which are the garbage cleaners, the trash cleaners trying to pick this up and carry it away. But what they do is these macrophages, they retain that aluminum, and the smaller doses more so than even the larger doses. And then when they get called to another site of activation or inflammation, which is often in the brain because of its high metabolic activity, they dump their aluminum there. And so that's part of the problem. So mitochondrial disorders, mitochondria are the little energy organelles in the cells that produce ATP. And if you have less energy reserves, if your power supply is less than someone else, you don't have the capability of kind of activating all the, energizing all of the cellular repair and removal mechanisms that someone else might have. So if you have this energy depletion state, you're more susceptible to the vaccines, and we're just not testing for it, and we should be. I mean, I would test every child for these gene mutations before we would give them vaccines. It would probably be one of the best investments that we could ever make in the health of our nation, because I mean, if we continue to increase, in the 1960s it was 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 36 today, and 1 in 28 of those are boys. If we keep progressing at this exponential rate that we've been watching for the last 3 decades, we're not going to have enough people capable of working, paying taxes to support this nation, and that's a real concern. You know, it's real. No tinfoil hat here. It's just real science that is not being given the time of day that it should be.
Thanks again.
You're welcome.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Oh boy.